This truck behind me needs a new rear differential. Is it really worth repairing, or should we just replace it? We happen to be working on a Ford here, but just so you know, what we're going over in this video will apply to pretty much any truck that has a solid rear axle setup. They are all set up the same, they're just going to be different parts. So the first thing I want to go over is how do you even acquire the correct part, the correct rear differential for your truck, because they're not all going to be the same, even if it's the same year, make, and model. This, for example, is a 2009 Ford F-150. But Ford put 3 or 4 rear differentials in this, and the gear ratios is what makes them different. So you want to make sure you have the right one. The easiest way to know what axle you need or what rear differential you need is to look on the door sticker. Now, depending on what vehicle you have, it might not be on the door itself, it might be on the B-pillar, but regardless, it should tell you all the information you need about the truck. In our case, Ford puts an axle code on these stickers. You can see right here, it says H9. We need to make sure that the vehicle that we take the axle out of, or the rear differential, also has the same door sticker. Now, we do have to cross-reference this with the differential that is in the truck currently, because someone could have already swapped it, but this is the best starting place. On the rear differential of our particular truck, you can see there's a sticker on the axle tube, and all these numbers are referencing everything you need to know about this rear differential. So with these numbers, you can either look them up online or call your dealer and make sure that they match what the door sticker says. In our case, this does not match the door sticker. So I think what happened here is someone replaced this rear end already and put in something that was not actually meant to go on this truck. So the best thing to do in this case is to get your VIN, call the dealer, and find out all the information they can give you about what's supposed to be in here so you can get yourself the right one. Otherwise, you could have some pretty big issues. So what happens if you don't have an axle tag? Let's say you go get your used rear axle from a salvage yard and it just doesn't have a tag. It looks identical though. Brakes look the same, all the rest of the setup is identical. You need to figure out if it has the right gear ratio. If it does, and it looks identical, you're good to go. So explained very simply, how many times does the input have to spin for the output to spin once? Example, a 3-to-1 gear ratio means this has to spin 3 full turns in order for the output side to spin once. However, when testing the gear ratio, the way I'm testing it right now, I locked that wheel, or the brakes on that side, I locked them up so that only one side spins. That actually doubles our speed on this side. So if this is supposed to spin, for example, 3 full turns, now I'm only going to get 1.5 turns. You divide that by 2, and that should get that mark back in the same spot. The gear ratio that I'm actually looking for here is a 3.55, meaning with both sides spinning identically, so at the same speed, this needs to spin 3.5 times. We'll round it down. Let's spin this around. Now remember, I have that side locked, so this is going to spin twice as fast. Watch the tape marks, which I also marked with a yellow crayon. We're going to line this one up and that one up, and then we're going to spin it. That's 1 full rotation on here, but that tape mark is not lined up yet, so we're going to keep going until I see it right there. This gives us, if you can see here, 1 3/4 turns. You double that, and it's very close to 3.55. So we know we have a 3.55 gear ratio. There are 2 different ones that Ford put in this situation, or in our case, in this rear end. So the other ones are higher and lower than this. So you'll be, if you don't have 1 3/4 turns with one wheel locked up, well, you have a different gear ratio. So in our case, we know we're good. If you are unable to stop one side from spinning, or if it's a limited slip or a locking rear differential and it's in the locked position, both sides will spin at the same rate. If it's not locked together, but you can't stop this from spinning, you need to make sure that they are spinning at the same rate as you're turning the input. Because if they are not, and you're just looking at that one side, if all of a sudden that side starts going slower and this one starts going faster, now it's going to offset your count and you're not going to get the right number. And that's why you want to make sure they're either both spinning exactly the same the whole time, or just lock one up, prevent it from spinning, and look at that side and then multiply our number by 2 so that you can actually get the correct number if both sides were spinning. All right, so let's get into replacing this differential. I like to start by opening the cover for several reasons. Well, in this case, I'm just going to replace it, which, by the way, any parts that you're going to see new on this, we do sell at oneauto.com. So if you want to refresh your rear differential while you're doing this job, well, might as well check us out and see what else you can upgrade on this. However, I like to take this cover off mainly so that I can inspect what's inside. I want to see clean fluid in there. I don't want to see a mess of old gear oil and hopefully not bearing damage, and especially not water. So I'm just going to take all these bolts off. Obviously I have a drain pan underneath. And hopefully we can expose some clean fluid. All right, now because I'm replacing it, I'm not really worried about damaging it. It's not bolted on anymore, so it will pop off as soon as the seal breaks. So I'm gonna try and clean this debris off of here so I can get some sort of tool to pry it away. That looks like it's pretty rusty on there. Let's see if I can get inside this bolt hole. I'm just trying to break the seal here. Aha. Well, if your pry bar doesn't work, just grab a chisel. And there we go. Ooh, that looks good. That is brand new gear oil, and that is what I like to see. Let's break the seal. Wow, that is actually in really good condition, which is good. That's what you want to see. Let's take this off completely, inspect the rest of it. Really clean. I like that. Very clean fluid. It doesn't smell. Well, I mean, it smells like gear oil, which if you've smelled it, you know the smell, but it doesn't smell like it's burnt, old, mixed in with any other debris. It looks like it's still very thick, has a lot of viscosity to it, and it obviously looks pretty fresh. It's not as clear as when it was brand new, but it really doesn't have many miles on it, so this is good. I will not replace the cover right now because I still want this one there while the entire differential is going in. I'm not going to fill it yet anyway until it's in, so just for now, that way fluid stops leaking. I'm going to put this one back on. I know it's not going to seal up perfectly. I just want it to stay here and cover up the entire rear end so that no debris gets in, but at least this allowed me to inspect it and make sure that it is good to go, it is healthy. At this point, you can also check the pattern of the gears internally if you wanted to. Make sure that they're grabbing properly, but this looks good to me. It's the right rear end, so I'm just gonna put a couple bolts in here, snug them up, and we'll put it in the truck. The salvage yard that we purchased this from just pretty much chopped off everything on the body side or on the frame side, which is good because you wouldn't want it cut off here. But I'm not going to reuse these brake hoses or the this side of the harness, obviously, for the ABS sensor. So I need to unplug these, remove the ABS or the brake hoses off of this bracket here and leave the ABS wires attached so that we can connect these lines to the lines that already are on the truck. So let's get these fittings off. I sprayed them ahead of time. Hopefully they will break free, and yep, easy peasy, those break free. I'm using a flare nut wrench, by the way. I don't recommend using a regular wrench just because it doesn't really grab on as well, and often these will rust. You don't want to twist those brake lines, and well, I mean, if you do, you're just gonna have to put new brake lines on, which is no fun. These are probably gonna leak, so I'm gonna grab the bucket. I'm gonna pull these off, and then it's important to take these fittings off before you take the clip out, because then if you do this first, the line is all loose, so then you won't have any sort of anchor point to break these fittings free. So that's the trick here, and once these are out, I'm gonna make sure that minimal debris gets in here. We can always flush these lines after, and it's always a good idea to do that if they stay open for a while, especially on the on the truck side. And if you have a collection bucket underneath, make sure you don't drop your tool in there like I almost just did. That's no fun, especially when it's full of gear oil. So these are coming off really easy, which is good. In this climate, a lot of times these fittings rust, so it's a good idea to spray them ahead of time. All right, these are out. Get these away. Now we can grab a pry bar, try to pry these locking clips off of here. Okay, get that out. That allows this brake hose to come off. And get this out. Save these clips. You're going to reuse them. I mean, you can reuse the ones that are on the truck already, but these look like they're in better condition for me. Take this out. And we have to separate the ABS wire. Like I said, I'm reusing the ABS wire. You want to be careful with these because they're very thin wires inside, and they do break. You don't want to break them. All right, let's unplug this end. Get that out of there. All right, that's done. Let's pry these off of here, which may be a little more difficult considering this is not bolted onto the truck, and that's a pretty big retainer. So, I'll try my best here. Nope, not happening yet. Let's get these small ones off. And when doing this, it's best to use a trim tool so that you don't accidentally damage the connector, which clearly could be damaged no matter what you use, so that's a little ironic, but try your best. Otherwise, this will flop around, and that is no good. And these, well, I think I'm just going to have to pry on them till they come off. Ooh. And this one broke off. That's all right. It broke off of the retainer, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to use the retainer that's currently on the truck. This just slides on. I'm going to leave this here. Take this bracket with the brake hoses off. We're not using this. Throw that away. I'm going to leave these attached here. I might just bungee cord them so they stop flopping around. We're good. We're good here. Let's move on to removing the cut parking brake cables. These e-brake cables, they were cut from the salvage yard, which that's kind of normal. People just cut them that way to easily get this rear differential out. However, I'm going to use the ones that are in the truck right now. I'm just going to cut this here with a cutoff wheel. You can use cutters or whatever. I mean, if you want to take it out the nice way, you can, but with it on jack stands, you're going to kind of be fighting it, and it's a little wobbly for me, so I'm just going to cut it and get it out of here. That's the nice thing about not having to worry about reusing it. There we go. Do the same to the other side. I'm going to give you a few tips here. First of all, if you're doing this on the ground, really all you need is jack and jack stands, just several sets of jack stands. Take off the front wheels and put them on this differential, and guess what happens then? It can roll. So you don't have to haul it around with a jack or several people to lift it or keep it on jack stands. I'm going to put these on. And like I said, these are the front wheels. So now at this point, the truck can't roll anymore, but that's all right. It's staying in place anyway. Okay. Put these on both sides. You don't have to put them on all the lug nuts or torque them to spec yet or anything. These wheels are coming back off, so just put them on temporarily. All right. Let's grab a jack, take this off of the jack stands, and now we can roll it around wherever we need to. All right, so we're under the truck now, and a few tips here. First, I like to start with disconnecting the drive shaft. That way everything from here forward is done. I also have a bungee cord here so I can tie it out of the way. You can remove the drive shaft if you want, but I'm just going to tie it up and over so that it's out of our way. If you need to heat up the yoke here, go ahead and do it. That'll release the thread locker. Just make sure you don't strip out the head of them, because then you won't be able to put them back on. And if they get stuck on your socket, usually you can hammer them off. Okay, clearly these have been out already because there's a new drive shaft, so they're not seized in there. All right, this last one, I'm going to be careful because these drive shafts like to fall off, especially when they have just been replaced. And if that doesn't get you the angle you need with the truck in neutral, you can rotate it and get the perfect angle. Watch your fingers. All right, let's get this out of here, collapse it, push it up, and tie it out of the way. There we go, that should do. You might have noticed I didn't mark the drive shaft. Usually you mark it when you remove it and reinstall it. But when you replace a drive shaft or replace the rear end, what are you gonna line it up with? Nothing, it's new. Put it on when the time comes, and if there's a vibration, well, this is a new drive shaft, so it's more than likely perfectly balanced. But if you're reusing the old drive shaft and you have a vibration, take it out, get it balanced, or replace it. Because even if you mark this, obviously this is coming off, so there's nothing you can line it up with later on. I'm gonna take the shocks completely off, so obviously they have to come off of the bottom, but I'm gonna take them off the top too, just because I want them out of here. I want clear access to this whole area. We have to take e-brake cables off and obviously the U-bolts, so I want them out of here, basically. Depending on your setup, you may or may not have to remove them completely, but it's just gonna make things easier. There we go. Looks like we have one old one and one new one, so maybe we'll address that. All right, let's get the parking brake cables out of here, and they make a special tool for this. If you don't have it, you probably have a pry bar of some sort, or a screwdriver, that'll pry these tabs in, and once you do that, you should be able to slide it through. There we go. The trick here is to get both of them unlocked, slide it through the slot. All right, once you do that, this should pivot around. All right, there we go. Keep the spring on here. And let's do the same to the other side. Obviously, like I said, we're gonna be reusing these. They're in good condition. If they're not, this is the time to replace them. So the new differential comes with this bracket, and I want to use this one because it's easier to unbolt it than to pry this open and remove the cable out of it. So just take this bolt out, and again, just like with the rest of this, you might not have this set up here. And here, I'm just going to pry this open so that I can remove the cable, but when you pry on metal clips like this, just be careful. You don't want to stretch it out too far because then it won't hold when you want to put it back in. All right, get that out. Now, both parking brake cables are off. So other than U-bolts, all we have left is this situation here with the brake lines and the two ABS wires, which you already saw me remove on the junkyard differential. We have to obviously take the same thing off here, as well as this breather hose. And then what I want to do is actually set this down on the ground and remove it with the weight of the rear end on the wheels. If you want to put on jack stands, you can, but I don't want to do it in the air. I have a lift, and sure, I could set up some sort of situation here, some sort of bracing to hold this, but it's heavy and I don't want it dangling in the air, and if I can just do it on the ground, that'd be better. Plus, if you're in a driveway, it's going to be on the ground anyway. When we remove these lines, I know they look wet now, they haven't been broken free yet. I just soaked them down so that the fitting can break free. When you remove them, brake fluid will pour out of here, and it will not stop until that master cylinder is dry. Sure, you could pinch off the brake hoses, but that's not great. If you're replacing them, whatever. Crimp them down. Use locking pliers, special pinching pliers, whatever you have. But if you're not replacing them, which is my case, I want to show you a trick that will stop the brake fluid flow without doing anything to these brake hoses. But for that, we first need to crack a line loose, or a bleeder screw, whatever you want, but I might as well just crack this loose. Fluid will start dripping out of here, as you can see. And now let's go in the driver's seat and let me show you the trick. All right, so I have a pry bar in the driver's seat, and thankfully this is a power seat, so it actually makes my job a little easier. Put it right up against that brake pedal, squish it down as much as you can, put the pry bar into the seat, and this is where it comes in handy to have power seats. Push it forward until the brake pedal reaches the floor, or, you know, it's maxed out. Whoops, it's pushing the cushion up. That's all right. That's it. Brake pedal's all the way down. And what this does is it pushes the plunger inside the master cylinder all the way down. It will squish some fluid out, but after this, it'll stop. It's not gonna leak anymore. 3 things to say now. 1, the brake fluid stopped dripping, so our trick worked. Yay. 2, I have a brake light out. Noted. And 3, the brake lights are staying on now because the brake pedal's depressed, so I recommend disconnecting the battery. That way it doesn't stay on for hours and hours and drain the battery. As you can see, it stopped dripping. So, pull these off. All right, make sure you don't bend this brake line too much. Cap it off if you want to. That'll, or, you know, that end, so that they don't get plugged up with debris. In our case, the brake lines are actually split, and you have 2 hoses that come down, 1 for each side. Now, this is because we have 4-wheel ABS. On other trucks, you might not have this. A lot of times they'll have 1 center brake line for both rear brakes, and it splits on the rear differential. So there's 1 hose coming down into a splitter, and then it goes to both rear wheels. So you want to make sure that that also matches up. Get these things off of here. All right, cool. Let's go up top, disconnect the ABS sensors. And now obviously when you disconnect these, be gentle so you don't break the wire or the connector itself. You can't just pry it open. Well, I mean, you could gently, but you can't really beat on it like the junkyard one. When we plug them back in, we want to make sure we have the right side, otherwise the ABS signals will be crossed. There we go. All right. At this point, it's a good idea to ratchet strap the frame to the lift arm if you're working on a lift, because if you don't have it far enough back, the truck will kind of go bloop and nosedive. That's not a good thing. You don't want that to happen. And even if you do put it far enough back, which I tried my best to do, I put it as far back as I thought was necessary, it's still a good idea to strap it down. All right, so we're down to the U-bolts. And mine, I'm gonna have somewhat of a procedure to actually get them out of here. Sure, you could cut them, but that's gonna take a while. And if you cut them with a torch, that could get a little dangerous, especially since there's a fuel tank right there. I'm not gonna do it that way. I'm going to heat it up. And because I don't have a socket that fits on all the way, I'm going to wrench it off and then put a socket on. Regardless, I wanna talk about new U-bolts, why it's important to have them, and why they need to be replaced. So these get tightened a lot. They're pretty tight. They hold on the entire rear end and all the weight that goes on this truck, on the back of the truck. So not only is it important to have new ones because of their condition, as you can see, these are rusty, but they're not rotted. So could you reuse them? Well, they are reusable in that sense, but they do stretch. The threads get weak. The bolts themselves, this stretches over time, especially as you tighten it. So it's important to just put new hardware on, new U-bolts, new mounting nuts, washers in this case, and you don't want to take a chance on these potentially failing on you in the future. So it's very important that you have new hardware. Once you take this down, don't reuse it. Okay, so I'm going to put a pole jack here with a couple pieces of wood. The reason for that is so that I can remove all 8 of these mounting nuts, 4 on both sides. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on here. This will push the rear end up, and it will make it so that as I unbolt these, not only is there less downward pressure on them, but the differential is not going to drop down at all. It's going to stay exactly where it is. Once these are loose and low enough for me to get a 24mm socket on. That just happens to be the size for me. Then I can remove this. It'll drop down just until it hits the bolts or the nuts, and then we can put it on the ground, finish removing them with it on the ground. I don't want this thing dangling up in the air with it basically ready to fall off. A few threads down is fine, but I don't want to take the mounting nuts off all the way. Let's get this on the ground. So we're gonna drop this pole jack down a little. The rear end is now gonna settle back, or come back down on the leaf springs. It's gonna put the weight on those. We'll get this out of here. Put the entire rear end on the ground. Get the mounting nuts removed. And that's it, that'll be out. All right, we're on the ground. The differential is sitting on the two wheels. I have a jack supporting the pinion yoke over there so it doesn't tip forward. And we're going to take all these bolts out, or mounting nuts, I guess. Okay, there's one U-bolt. That one came out pretty fast. Okay. So, passenger side is disconnected. Save these brackets. These you will reuse. Let's go to the driver's side. All right, let's lift up the truck. Here's another tip for you. I'm gonna put some marks on the ground. I recommend you do the same, especially if you're working on a concrete floor like this where you can. I'm gonna degrease the floor. I'm just gonna put some tape down, and the tape will tell me not exactly. It will give me a very close location for where I need to put the new to me differential with the wheels to have the best possible alignment so the truck can drop right down on it where it's supposed to. I'm gonna put one piece of tape here where the tread just barely touches the ground. And same on the back side. It's not gonna be perfect, but I'm also not gonna be able to get it perfect. So this is close enough. We'll do the same to the other side, and then let's roll this thing away. All right, here we go. And this is exactly why I left the wheels on. Bye-bye. All right, so the old differential is out, and the new one here has these mounting plates just like the old one, and the old one had these spacers on them. This is factory, this is not a lift kit. And of course you could at this point get bigger ones if you wanted to lift the rear end a little bit, if you're towing heavy stuff. That way it sits level. Basically, I'm gonna put this on. I will also put a little spacer here. This is gonna lift the end of the truck about 1 inch. However, you wanna make sure that if you do that, these pins can go into these holes here. For me, it's a little bit rusty, so I'm gonna scoop these out with a pry bar and a hammer. Literally scoop out the rust. All right, it's cleaned up. This fits, so we have our 1 inch lift. And before I put this together, because of the climate that this truck lives in, as you can see, this is pretty rusty here. I also cleaned this up, as you can see. This doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be as flat as possible so that this block doesn't sit crooked. And honestly, for the climate that this truck lives in, I would recommend an oil-based undercoating. But for these areas, I'm going to actually put some grease down because it's just going to keep rotting out if I don't. This grease will act as a hydrophobic layer. So if you live somewhere where they use a lot of salt in the winter, sand, cover this up. That way it stays nice and clean. Well, as clean as it will be. There we go. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna try and line it up with the tape marks. That's why I put them on the ground. Okay, let's see how poorly I did. Well, that's close. Needs to shift that way though. All right, that looks like it's pretty much spot on to where I had it before. All right, the rear end's as lined up as it's gonna be until the truck goes down, so let's bring it down and, well, see how close I got it. It's almost lined up. Needs to go a little bit more forward. So I'm going to crawl underneath, pull this forward a little bit. I think that's going to do it right there. Okay, so we got this lined up. It was a fight because it was this close, but every time I tried to move it the other direction to line it up, well, it pretty much went too far, and then I had to go back, and then I went too far backwards, and then too far forwards. So if you have two people, that's great. You can still do it by yourself, but it's going to take a lot of back and forth. Anyway, it's lined up now. I'm going to grab my new U-bolts. Once again, very important to have new U-bolts. If you look at the threads of the old ones, they're most likely somewhat damaged at this point. If they're not, well, I don't know how they're not, because usually they are. And the mounting nuts are also, well, not so great anymore. They've seen better days. So new U-bolts, new hardware. Absolutely mandatory. This bracket I will reuse. This is just a bracket and you basically have to reuse it. Depending on your differential, sometimes these are part of the differential, sometimes they're not. For me, they're not. So I'm gonna put these new U-bolts in with the bracket, and I'm gonna show you exactly why it is very important to follow the torque spec procedure for the tightening of these bolts, or well, I guess these are the bolts, but you tighten the nuts on the bolts. Anyway, I'm gonna show you exactly why that's very important. Okay, so once I put this on, make sure it's as centered as you can get it. I have washers here with this kit, and of course the mounting nuts themselves. So I'm going to put these on just so I can hold it. Obviously right now it's a little floppy. Get one side on. Also, while you're listening here, do you think washers are directional or not? If you can see, one side is slightly beveled, the other side's flat. What's your opinion? Leave it in the comments section because I'm curious. I have my opinion, but I'm not going to share it yet. I want to know what you think. Directional or non-directional? Anyway, let's get these on. And then if you know, well, you already know why it's important to torque these evenly. But basically, you can already see the problem here. This bracket is not physically attached to the differential. So it can do this. And if you just tighten up, let's say you take your impact and just go all the way with one side, tighten this up, now it's sitting like that. Now it's extremely uneven, so you want to compensate, get this side up. Well, now it's sitting crooked still. And then you go here, and it's just a mess. So if you don't have a mounting bracket that is welded, physically attached in some way, shape, or form to the differential, there is more than likely a torque sequence that you have to follow. In our case, because it's the way it is, it actually has 4 different passes. So again, we're working on an F-150 here, so Ford wants you to torque these 4 different times in a cross pattern, and that will ensure that this gets tightened perfectly flat up against the differential. Otherwise, the entire rear end could potentially be either out of alignment or not properly secured. So very big warning here. Make sure that these are properly secured like the manufacturer intended. Most of these washers still have some play to them, so that's okay. That means it's not completely tightened, which is exactly what we want. Also, side note, these are locking nuts. It's very important that you either have locking nuts or put thread locker on this. Because I have locking nuts, I don't have to worry about thread locker. So if you can get those because you will have to actually retorque these later. So breaking that thread locker loose just to retorque them is not a great idea. Whereas these locking nuts, the neoprene ring on them can be adjusted with it still doing its job. So anyway, let's get the torque wrench. When you do this, you definitely want to make sure you have the weight of the truck on the axle, so the axle itself, the entire differential, doesn't just float around on the leaf springs or under the leaf springs. You want it pressed up against, nice and tight. Well, technically, this is it right here, but I'm going to check them because not only could they stretch, but they could also settle in at the top here, start squishing down on everything, and they could loosen up. Just as you torque the next one, the first one will potentially loosen up a little bit. So as you can see, I started with this one and it's no longer at 98 foot-pounds, which is my particular torque that I need to aim for here. Whew. There we go, now it is. That one still is. That one was not. And this one almost was, so I'm gonna go around one more time until they all are. It's very important. Yep. 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 All right. Well, I think we're all set. We can do the other side, and like I said, you definitely want to check these after a couple 100 miles because the bolts could stretch, things could settle, and they could loosen up. Very important. All right, the U-bolts are bolted on. Let's lift up the truck. It's back up in the air, obviously because I'm on a lift. If you're on the ground, you can raise it up and put everything back together. Now, it's pretty simple at this point. The only thing I want to emphasize is you have to bleed your brakes thoroughly after you do this. You had brake lines disconnected. I just had them disconnected overnight. But no matter how long you had them disconnected, it could be 5 seconds, could be 5 days. You have to bleed them thoroughly because air got in the system. Also, assuming this is a used differential, you have no idea what kind of brake fluid is in these lines and in these calipers. So get fresh fluid in that master cylinder, flush the entire brake system. I mean, you could just do the rear, sure, but at that point you might as well just do the whole system and be done with it. So let's get this back together. I think it's safe to remove the strap now. Everything's back together. There we go. Now, because I don't know the history of this differential, it does look good, but I want to refresh it so that I get a fresh start. I'm going to put new brakes on it, new calipers. I'm going to put new parking brake shoes. I'm also going to put brand new bearings and seals on both sides. That way, like I said, I get a fresh start. By the way, if you need any of those parts, we do sell them at oneauto.com, so check us out. And at the end, I'm going to top this off with fresh fluid, and it is important that you use the manufacturer specified fluid, otherwise you could cause issues. All these bearings are lubricated by the gear oil that's in there, especially the pinion bearing right here at the front of the differential. It's actually lubricated by fluid that splashes up at it. So if it's too thin, it can actually cause wear. Too thick, it actually will not sling up there. The ring gear won't sling the oil, and then your pinion bearing will wear out prematurely. So that's why it's important to have the right viscosity of gear oil in your differential. So after all that, it'll be time for a road test. So we're on our test drive right now. Everything feels great. There are no strange noises, no strange behavior, so I'm very happy with this. The job was a success. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and if you have anything to say or you want to see more content of this style, leave it in the comment section below. Other than that, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest content. Thanks for watching. Or should I put another old one in it? Let me say that differently. Are you filming me?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I was.
So here's the deal. You pointed at me.
Sorry.
That's okay.